The carriage smelled of pine needles and something darker. Wet fur, maybe. Or the musk of bodies that had traveled too long without rest. I pressed myself against the velvet seat, my fingers clutching the worn leather of my traveling bag, and tried to make myself smaller. Outside, the forest blurred past in streaks of shadow and moonlight, branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers seeking entry. I shouldn't have been here. The thought circled my mind like a vulture, relentless and hungry. When I'd stumbled into the transport station 3 hours ago, desperate to escape the suffocating disappointment of my father's house. I hadn't bothered to check which carriage I was boarding. The attendant had been distracted, waving me through with barely a glance at my ticket. Now, surrounded by passengers whose eyes gleamed too bright in the darkness, whose conversations fell to whispers when they thought I wasn't listening, I understood my mistake. This wasn't the public coach to the northern settlements. This was a pack carriage. My hair, pale as winter wheat, my mother used to say before she left, caught the lamplight every time we passed beneath a street lamp, marking me as obviously human in a space that belonged to wolves. I'd braided it tightly against my skull this morning, trying to appear unremarkable, forgettable. It hadn't worked. The woman across from me hadn't stopped staring since we crossed the border into pack territory, her nostrils flaring slightly with each breath, as if she could taste my difference in the air. I focused on the window, watching my reflection waver in the glass. 23 years old, and I still flinched at my own face. Too soft, too ordinary, marked by none of the sharp elegance that seemed to define everyone else in my world. My father had made his feelings clear enough this morning. "You're a disappointment, Sarah," he'd said, not even looking up from his breakfast. "Your sister managed to secure a marriage proposal by your age. You can't even maintain employment." He wasn't wrong. I'd been dismissed from my position at the textile factory 2 weeks ago for attitude problems, which really meant I'd objected when the foreman tried to dock our pay for the 3rd time that month. The other girls had looked away when I was escorted out, their silence a practical choice I couldn't blame them for. Survival required compromise. I'd never been good at knowing which battles to fight. So I'd packed what little I owned and bought a ticket north, toward the settlements where my aunt lived, where maybe I could disappear into a new life, where maybe I could figure out who I was supposed to be when I wasn't busy failing everyone's expectations. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jostling me against the window. Pain flared across my shoulder, the same spot where I'd fallen last winter, slipping on ice while running an errand for my father. It had never quite healed right, just another weakness to catalog alongside all the others. "You're very far from home," the voice startled me. The woman across from me had leaned forward, her dark eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. She was younger than I'd initially thought, perhaps my age, though she carried herself with a confidence I'd never possessed. Her hair fell in thick black waves over her shoulders, and when she smiled, I caught the slightest glimpse of teeth that seemed just a fraction too sharp. "I'm traveling to the northern settlements," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt, "to family." "In a pack carriage?" Her smile widened, though it didn't reach her eyes. How unexpected. The other passengers had gone silent now, all pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Heat crept up my neck. I'd learned long ago that being noticed was dangerous. It invited questions, judgments, the kind of attention that left bruises even when no one laid a hand on you. "I must have boarded the wrong one," I said quietly. "I'll transfer at the next stop. The next stop is the Silver Pine Estate." The woman tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "The Alpha King's personal residence. This carriage only stops there." My stomach dropped. Alpha King. The words carried weight even I understood, despite knowing almost nothing about pack politics. Royalty among wolves, power that could crush a misplaced human girl without even noticing. "I see." I forced myself to meet her gaze, even as panic clawed at my throat. "Then I apologize for the intrusion. I'll arrange other transportation from there. Will you?" Something flickered across her face. Amusement, maybe, or calculation. "That's quite far to travel alone." "These roads aren't safe after dark, especially for someone like you." Someone like me. Human. Weak. Prey. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. Wolves who'd forgotten how to control their instincts, who saw humans as nothing more than food or playthings. Most of it was probably exaggeration, Fear turned into folklore. But sitting here, surrounded by predators whose very nature was designed to hunt creatures like me, those stories felt considerably less fictional. "I'll manage," I said, lifting my chin in a show of courage I didn't feel. "I always do." The woman laughed, a sound like silver bells, beautiful and somehow mocking. "I'm sure you will." She settled back against her seat, still watching me with those two bright eyes. "My name is Kala, by the way. And you are?" "Sarah." "Sarah." She tested the name, rolling it around in her mouth. "Well, Sarah, since we're traveling companions, perhaps I should warn you. My brother doesn't particularly enjoy surprises. Unexpected guests tend to unsettle him, brother." The word registered slowly, its implications sinking in like stones through water. "Your brother?" "The Alpha King." Kala's smile turned sharp. "Though between us, I think he could use a little unsettling. He's been impossibly dull lately, all work and no pleasure. It's quite tedious. I should have been terrified. Should have been calculating escape routes, planning apologies, preparing for whatever punishment awaited someone who'd accidentally infiltrated royal transportation. Instead, I found myself curious about this brother who apparently found pleasure tedious, who could be unsettled by something as insignificant as a lost human girl. "I'm sure he has important responsibilities," I offered carefully. "Oh, he does. Terribly important." Kala waved a hand dismissively. "Border disputes and pack politics and endless councils debating things that could be solved with a simple show of teeth. But do you know what he doesn't have?" I waited, knowing she'd tell me regardless. "A mate." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I couldn't fully grasp. I knew the basics. Wolves bonded for life, their connections deeper and more permanent than human marriage. But the specifics remained a mystery, something discussed in whispers and knowing glances that excluded people like me. "I'm sure he'll find someone suitable," I said, desperate to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Suitable." Kala's laugh was sharp. "Everyone's suitable. That's the problem. They throw themselves at him like moths to flame, all desperate for power and status. He barely sees them. Barely sees anything anymore except duty and responsibility." She leaned forward again, her voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. "But you know what I think he needs? Someone unexpected. Someone who doesn't want anything from him. Someone who'd challenge him to remember what it feels like to actually feel something." The way she was looking at me made my skin prickle with warning. "That's not me." "Isn't it?" Kala's eyes gleamed. "You boarded the wrong carriage. You're traveling alone to an uncertain future. You met my gaze instead of looking away. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. And either way, that's far more interesting than anything that's happened in his life for months." "I'm neither brave nor interesting," I said firmly. "I'm just someone who made a mistake." Mistakes can be wonderfully illuminating. She settled back again, looking pleased with herself. "Besides, we're almost there. You'll meet him soon enough, and then we'll see." I turned back to the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the trees, I could see lights now, golden and warm, spilling from windows of what had to be the largest building I'd ever seen. The Silver Pine estate rose from the forest like something from a dream, all stone towers and arched windows, ancient and impossibly elegant. And somewhere inside, an Alpha King who didn't enjoy surprises waited, unaware that his sister had decided to play matchmaker with a human girl who'd simply boarded the wrong carriage. The vehicle began to slow, wheels crunching over gravel. Other passengers gathered their belongings, their movements fluid and purposeful. I remained frozen, my bag clutched in white-knuckled hands, as we rolled to a stop before massive oak doors. "Come along, Sarah," Kala said brightly, rising to her feet. "Let's introduce you to my brother. I have a feeling this is going to be fascinating." The grand hall swallowed me whole. I'd never seen anything like it. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow, walls lined with tapestries depicting wolves running beneath full moons, and chandeliers dripping with crystals that caught the firelight and scattered it across the polished stone floor. Everything about this place whispered of old power, The kind that didn't need to announce itself because it had existed long before I was born and would continue long after I was gone. Calla moved through the space like she owned it, which I supposed she did. Servants appeared and disappeared with practiced efficiency, taking coats and bags without making eye contact. I stood awkwardly near the entrance, still clutching my worn leather bag, painfully aware of how out of place I looked. My traveling dress was clean, but faded, mended in places where the fabric had worn thin. Next to Calla's effortless elegance, I felt like a sparrow that had wandered into a palace of hawks. "Stop looking so terrified," Calla said over her shoulder, not slowing her pace. "You'll make everyone nervous." "I'm not terrified," I lied, hurrying to keep up with her long strides. "I'm simply aware of my circumstances, which are that I've accidentally intruded on royal property and should probably apologize and leave as quickly as possible." Calla laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Nonsense. You're here now. Might as well make the most of it. Besides, it's nearly midnight. The next transport won't arrive until morning. And I'm certainly not sending you out into the forest alone at night. My brother may be dull, but he'd have my head if I let harm come to a guest." Guest. The word felt too generous for what I actually was. A trespasser, an accident, a complication. But before I could argue, Calla pushed open a set of double doors and strode into what appeared to be a private study. The room was dimmer than the hall, lit only by a fire crackling in an enormous hearth and a few scattered lamps. Bookshelves lined every wall, crammed with volumes that looked ancient and well-used. The air smelled of wood smoke and old paper, with an underlying scent I couldn't quite identify, something wild and earthy that made the hair on my arms stand up. And there, behind a massive desk covered in maps and documents, sat a man who made every instinct I possessed scream danger. He didn't look up when we entered. His attention remained fixed on whatever he was reading, one hand absently running through dark hair that looked like it had been forgotten in favor of more important matters. Even sitting, I could tell he was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of strength rather than leisure. He wore simple clothes, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark trousers. But somehow they looked more elegant than anything I'd ever seen in my father's formal gatherings. "Calla." His voice was deeper than I'd expected, roughened by something that might have been exhaustion. "I thought you were staying in the Eastern Territories until next week." "Plans change." Calla dropped into a chair with casual grace. "I brought you a present." That made him look up. His eyes found mine immediately, and I forgot how to breathe. They were amber, the exact color of whiskey held up to lamplight, ringed with darker gold that seemed to glow in the firelight. And they were looking at me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously visible and completely exposed, like he could see through all my carefully constructed defenses to the frightened girl beneath. "This," Calla said cheerfully, "is Sarah. She accidentally boarded our carriage instead of the public coach. I thought it would be rude to throw her out into the wilderness, so I brought her home." The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. The Alpha King, because this had to be him, no one else could command a room simply by existing in it, stood slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. He was even taller than I'd thought, and as he moved around the desk, I noticed the way he carried himself, controlled, deliberate, like a predator deciding whether something was worth the effort of hunting. "You boarded the wrong carriage." His tone gave nothing away. "Yes." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'll leave at first light." "Will you?" It wasn't a question. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. "And where exactly were you planning to go that you couldn't tell the difference between a pack carriage and public transportation?" Heat crept up my neck. "The northern settlements. I wasn't paying attention. I trailed off, unwilling to explain the desperate circumstances that had driven me onto that carriage without thinking. "Running away," he finished for me. Something almost like understanding flickering across his features before disappearing behind that controlled mask. "Leaving," I corrected quietly. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Before I could answer, Calla stood and stretched, looking far too pleased with herself. "Well, this has been delightful, but I'm exhausted from traveling, Sarah. You'll stay in the East Wing tonight. Dorian, do try not to interrogate our guest too harshly. She's had a long day." "Dorian," I repeated before I could stop myself. The Alpha King's mouth twitched, the first sign of any expression beyond that careful neutrality. "My name. Since we're apparently hosting you, you should probably know it." Calla swept from the room, leaving me alone with a man whose very presence made the air feel heavier. I stood there, still clutching my bag, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with my hands, my eyes, my entire awkward existence. "Sit." Dorian gestured to the chair Calla had vacated. "You look like you're about to collapse." I wanted to argue, to maintain some shred of dignity, but he wasn't wrong. The day had been impossibly long, and standing this close to him made my legs feel unreliable. I sank into the chair, setting my bag at my feet, and tried not to think about how small I probably looked in this massive room, in this enormous house, sitting across from someone who could probably break me without even trying. He returned to his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against it, arms crossed, still watching me with those unsettling eyes. "Why were you running away?" "I told you. I was leaving." "It's different. Explain the difference." I met his gaze, searching for some sign of mockery or judgment, but found only genuine curiosity. Something about that made me want to be honest, even though honesty had rarely served me well. "Running away implies you're escaping something specific," I said slowly. "Leaving is more like walking toward the possibility that somewhere else might feel less suffocating than where you've been." Dorian was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, "That's a very careful distinction for someone who claims not to be running." "I'm very good at careful distinctions. It's one of my few talents." "What are the others?" The question surprised me. People didn't usually ask what I was good at. They were far more interested in cataloging my failures. I can read faster than anyone I've ever met. I remember everything I've read, even if I don't want to. And I'm excellent at being invisible when I need to be. You're not doing very well at that last one tonight. Despite everything, I felt my mouth curve into something almost like a smile. Well, I wasn't trying to be invisible. I was trying to board a carriage and disappear into a new life. Clearly, I failed at that too, or succeeded at finding something you weren't looking for. He pushed off the desk, moving to the fire. The flames cast shifting shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. My sister has a terrible habit of meddling. She thinks I need distraction. Understanding dawned slowly. She thought bringing home a stray human would distract you. Something like that. He stared into the flames, his profile sharp against the firelight. Calla believes I've become too focused on duty, too controlled. She thinks it's making me forget how to actually live. Is she right? The question escaped before I could think better of it. Dorian turned to look at me, surprise flickering across his features, before settling back into that careful neutrality. "Perhaps," he said finally. "It's easier to focus on problems I can solve than to think about the ones I can't." I understood that better than I wanted to admit. How many nights had I spent cataloging factory orders or memorizing trade routes instead of thinking about my mother's absence, my father's disappointment, my own inability to fit into the shape everyone expected? "What problems can't you solve?" I asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. That's too personal. I shouldn't have..." Loneliness. The word dropped between us like a stone into still water. Dorian's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw beneath that controlled exterior. I can negotiate peace treaties and manage border disputes and lead councils, but I can't seem to solve being surrounded by people who want things from me while feeling completely alone. The honesty of it stole my breath. Here was an Alpha King, powerful beyond my comprehension, admitting to the same hollow ache I'd carried for years, the sense of being visible only for what you could provide, never for who you actually were. "I know that feeling," I said quietly. "Being useful isn't the same as being wanted." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or relief at being understood. He moved back toward the desk, but this time he sat in the chair beside mine instead of behind the barrier of wood and paper. "Tell me about the factory," he said. "Calla mentioned you lost your position." How did she? I stopped, remembering the way she'd studied me in the carriage, the questions that had seemed casual, but probably weren't. She's very observant. She's very nosy, Dorian corrected, but there was affection in his voice. Though in this case, I'm glad she was. What happened? So I told him. About the foreman's theft, the docked wages, my objection that had cost me my job. About the other girls who'd looked away because they couldn't afford my kind of courage. About my father's disappointment that I'd prioritized principle over practicality again. Dorian listened without interrupting, his full attention focused on me in a way I wasn't used to. Most people waited for their turn to talk, their eyes already glazing over with whatever they planned to say next. But he actually listened, his expression shifting subtly as I spoke. Anger when I mentioned the foreman, something almost like respect when I explained why I'd spoken up despite knowing the consequences. Your father called you a disappointment, he said when I finished, his voice carefully controlled. But it sounds like you were the only one brave enough to tell the truth. Brave or stupid, I shrugged, trying to dismiss the warmth his words created in my chest. The result was the same either way. The result was that you maintained your integrity while everyone else sacrificed theirs for safety. Dorian leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. That's not stupid, Sarah. That's rare. No one had ever called my stubbornness rare before. Foolish, yes. Impractical, certainly, but rare felt like something precious, something that mattered beyond simple survival. What about you? I asked, desperate to shift attention away from myself. What truth did you tell that left you feeling so alone? His laugh was quiet, almost bitter. That I didn't want any of this, the crown, the responsibility, the endless weight of expectations. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it further. My father died 3 years ago. I was supposed to take his place, lead our people, continue his legacy. And I have. Successfully, by all accounts. But no one ever asked if it was what I wanted. They just assumed. What did you want? The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I wanted to travel, see the world beyond pack territories. Maybe write. I used to write before. Poetry, stories, anything that let me create something instead of just maintaining what already existed. He looked up at me, something vulnerable in his eyes. Stupid, right? An alpha king who'd rather write poems than negotiate treaties. Not stupid. I echoed his earlier words back to him. Rare. The smile that crossed his face was small, but genuine, and it transformed him entirely. For just a moment, he wasn't the controlled, careful ruler. He was simply someone who'd been seen, truly seen. Maybe for the first time in years. I should let you rest, he said, though he didn't move. You've had a long journey, and tomorrow you'll need to arrange transportation to the settlements. Yes. I stood, retrieving my bag, suddenly reluctant to leave this room, this conversation, this strange moment of connection with someone who should have been nothing more than a terrifying mistake. Thank you for not throwing me out immediately. Thank you for telling the truth. He stood as well, towering over me but somehow not threatening, even the uncomfortable parts. A servant appeared at the door. I hadn't heard her approach, ready to escort me to my room. I followed her into the hallway, but at the threshold I looked back. Dorian was still standing there, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. In the firelight, with his guard momentarily lowered, he looked younger than I'd first thought, and tired. So tired. Good night, Dorian, I said softly. Good night, Sarah. The door closed between us, but I carried the weight of his gaze all the way to the east wing, where a room far too elegant for someone like me waited. And as I finally collapsed into a bed softer than anything I'd ever known, I couldn't stop thinking about amber eyes and honest words, and the strange understanding that had passed between two lonely people who'd accidentally found each other in the darkness. Morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to curtain. I woke disoriented, tangled in sheets that smelled of lavender and something wilder. Pine, maybe, or the forest itself. For a confused moment, I thought I was still at my father's house, that yesterday had been nothing more than an elaborate dream. Then I saw the room, It was easily 3 times the size of the space I'd occupied back home, with furniture carved from dark wood and upholstered in deep greens and golds. A wardrobe stood against one wall, its doors slightly ajar to reveal clothes that definitely weren't mine. On the nightstand, someone had left a tray with tea and fresh bread, still warm enough to steam faintly in the cool morning air. I sat up slowly, my body protesting the movement. My shoulder ached where I'd slept on it wrong, and my head felt thick with too little rest and too many thoughts. The conversation with Dorian replayed in my mind. His admission of loneliness, the way he'd actually listened when I spoke. That small, genuine smile that had made him look almost human. Almost. I couldn't forget what he was, what everyone here was. Predators who'd welcomed me into their den, either out of courtesy or because Calla had some scheme I didn't fully understand. The smart thing would be to eat quickly, arrange transportation, and disappear before I complicated whatever game she was playing. But when had I ever done the smart thing? I washed in the basin provided, braided my hair with practiced efficiency, and discovered that the wardrobe did indeed contain clothes in approximately my size. The dress was simpler than Calla's elegant attire, but far finer than anything I owned. Soft gray wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. I told myself I was only borrowing it because my traveling dress needed washing, not because some small, vain part of me wanted to look less like a charity case. The halls were quieter than I'd expected as I made my way downstairs, following the scent of food toward what I hoped was a dining room. Servants nodded politely as I passed, but didn't speak, their expressions carefully neutral. I wondered what they thought of the human girl who'd accidentally stumbled into their world. I found the dining room by accident. Or maybe by design, since the layout of this place seemed deliberately confusing. It was smaller than the grand hall, but still impressive, with tall windows overlooking gardens just beginning to show signs of spring. A long table dominated the space, and at one end, Calla sat eating breakfast with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never worried about going hungry. "Sarah." She waved me over, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. "You look much better with proper rest. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." I settled into the chair, trying not to stare at the abundance of food spread across the table. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways, meats I couldn't identify, more food than my father's household would see in a week. "I appreciate your hospitality, but I should arrange transportation soon. I don't want to impose further." "Impose?" Calla laughed, selecting a pastry and biting into it with obvious pleasure. "Nonsense. You're our guest. Besides, I already sent word to your aunt in the northern settlements. She'll expect you next week." I froze. "You what?" "Your aunt. Meredith, isn't it? I had someone contact her, let her know you'd been delayed but would arrive safely. She sent back a lovely message saying she's delighted you're coming and that a week's delay is perfectly fine." Calla smiled brightly. "So you see, there's no rush at all." A week. She'd trapped me here for a week with a single message, and there was nothing I could do about it without seeming ungrateful or suspicious. I'd never told Calla my aunt's name. She must have gone through my bag while I slept, read the letter I'd been carrying. The invasion of privacy should have angered me, but I was too busy trying to figure out her game to properly object. "That was thoughtful," I managed. "But I couldn't possibly stay here that long. I have no purpose, no way to earn my keep. Then we'll find you one." A new voice, deeper and more controlled than Calla's, cut through my protests. Dorian stood in the doorway, looking far more composed than he had last night. He wore darker clothes today, black shirt, black trousers, that somehow made his eyes seem even more intense. His hair was still slightly messy, though, as if he'd tried to tame it and given up halfway through. "Good morning, brother," Calla said sweetly. "I was just telling Sarah that she'll be staying with us for the week, so I heard." Dorian moved to the opposite end of the table, pouring himself coffee from a silver pot. "I also heard you've been meddling in matters that aren't your concern." "Everything is my concern. I'm your sister. That doesn't give you the right to manipulate our guests." They spoke with the ease of siblings who'd had this argument 1,000 times before, affection woven through the irritation. I sat quietly, torn between embarrassment at being the source of their disagreement and fascination at seeing Dorian interact with someone he clearly cared about. "I'm not manipulating anyone," Calla protested. I'm simply providing Sarah with options. She can leave today if she wants, though honestly, what's waiting for her? A week of travel to reach an aunt she's never met, arriving exhausted and unprepared. She turned to me, her expression suddenly serious. Or she could stay here, rest, perhaps help with some of the administrative work that's drowning my brother. You said you read quickly and remember everything. We could use someone with those skills. I'm not qualified to. You're more qualified than half the people we employ, Dorian interrupted quietly. He was watching me over his coffee cup, that same intense focus from last night. I have 300 years of border disputes that need cataloging. Treaties that require cross-referencing with historical precedents. My counsel keeps requesting documentation I can't find, because the previous archivists organized everything according to some system only they understood. He paused. If you're willing to help, I'd be grateful. And I'd pay you fairly for your time. The offer hung in the air between us. He was giving me a choice, genuinely giving me one, not manipulating or pressuring. I could leave today with enough money for travel, or I could stay and earn more while helping with work that actually sounded interesting. And if I was honest with myself, I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Not when I'd just started to feel like maybe I existed as more than just a collection of failures. I'll stay, I said quietly. For the week. If you're certain I can help. The smile that crossed Dorian's face was small, but genuine. I'm certain. Calla looked entirely too pleased with herself. But before she could say anything, a man appeared in the doorway. He was older than Dorian, with silver threading through his dark hair, and scars crossing his hands in patterns that suggested violence survived rather than avoided. Apologies for interrupting, he said, his voice gravelly. But the Northern Border Patrol just sent word. There's been another incident. Dorian's expression shuddered immediately. That careful control slamming back into place. What kind of incident? 3 pack members missing. Same area as last month. No signs of struggle. No scent trails. Just gone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Calla's playful demeanor vanished, replaced by something sharp and focused. That's 7 in 2 months. 8. The scarred man corrected. Another went missing 2 days ago, but the report just reached us. Dorian set down his coffee cup with careful precision, as if he was focusing very hard on not slamming it against the table. Assemble the council. I want representatives from every northern pack in the meeting hall by midday. He turned to the scarred man. Connor, take your best trackers and investigate the sites again. There has to be something we're missing. Connor nodded and disappeared. Dorian stood, already moving toward the door, his breakfast forgotten. But he paused at the threshold, looking back at me. I'm sorry, he said. I wanted to show you the archives myself, but this can't wait. I understand. And I did. Whatever was happening at the border, it was clearly serious. People were missing. His people. Calla can show you to the library. Make yourself comfortable. Familiarize yourself with the space. We'll begin properly tomorrow if... He trailed off. If you still want to stay, Calla finished for him, after seeing how chaotic things actually are here. I met Dorian's gaze across the room. I'll stay. Something flickered in his expression, relief, maybe, or gratitude. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall with purposeful urgency. Calla stood, brushing crumbs from her dress. Well, that's going to consume him for the rest of the day, probably the night too. He'll forget to eat, forget to sleep. Just pace and plan until he's half dead with exhaustion. She sighed. Come on. I'll show you the library, and then I have some people I need to terrorize. The library turned out to be less a room and more a cathedral dedicated to knowledge. 3 stories tall, with spiral staircases connecting the levels and windows that filled the space with golden light. Books everywhere, crammed onto shelves, stacked on tables, piled in corners waiting to be filed. The scent of old paper and leather bindings wrapped around me like a familiar embrace. It's a disaster, Calla said cheerfully. Father collected obsessively, but never organized anything. Dorian's tried to bring order to it, but he's always too busy with actual ruling to make much progress. She gestured broadly at the chaos. So, have fun. She left me there, alone among thousands of volumes that represented centuries of accumulated knowledge. I should have felt overwhelmed. Instead, I felt something close to joy. I'd always loved libraries, the quiet of them, the way knowledge sat patient and waiting for someone to discover it. Growing up, I'd spent every spare moment in the small public library near my father's house, losing myself in stories and histories until the attendants forced me to leave at closing. This was different. This was endless. I spent the morning exploring, running my fingers along spines, pulling down volumes at random to examine their contents. Treaties, yes, but also poetry and philosophy, scientific texts, and artistic analyses. Someone, Dorian's father, presumably, had been interested in everything, and that curiosity had filled this space with treasures. I found the section on border disputes around midday, hundreds of documents, some dating back centuries, written in dozens of different hands. No discernible organization, just chaos waiting for someone patient enough to impose order. Challenge accepted. I cleared one of the large tables, found paper and ink, and began. First, I'd need to understand what existed. Then I could create a system for cataloging it. Then actual organization could begin. The work was exactly what my mind needed. Complex enough to be engaging, structured enough to be soothing. Hours passed without my noticing. The light shifted from gold to amber. As afternoon faded toward evening, my hand cramped from writing, my back ached from hunching over documents, and I'd never been happier. "You're still here." I looked up to find Dorian standing in the doorway, looking exhausted. His shirt was rumpled, his hair thoroughly messed now, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested the day had been even longer than Calla predicted. I got absorbed, I admitted, gesturing at the organized chaos I'd created. "I've cataloged about a third of the border dispute documents. There's a pattern to them. Most conflicts happen in spring and fall, during migration periods. And there are 3 major families whose names appear repeatedly across centuries, always on opposite sides of every argument." Dorian moved into the room slowly, studying my work. "You did all this in one day? I told you I read quickly." I stood, stretching muscles that protested being still for so long. "How was the council meeting?" His expression darkened. "Frustrating. Everyone has theories. No one has answers. The missing pack members have nothing in common. Different ages, different ranks, different territories. No pattern we can identify." He sank into one of the chairs, rubbing his eyes. "I'm missing something obvious. I know I am." Without thinking, I moved to stand beside him. "Tell me about it. Sometimes explaining to someone else helps clarify your own thoughts." So he did. He laid out everything. The timeline of disappearances, the lack of evidence, the growing fear among the northern packs. His people were starting to question his leadership, wondering why their Alpha King couldn't protect them from this invisible threat. I listened the way he'd listened to me last night, focusing entirely on his words, watching the way frustration and exhaustion warred across his features. And as he spoke, something occurred to me. "What if it's not about who's being taken?" I said slowly. "But where they're being taken from." Dorian looked up at me. "What do you mean?" "You said there's no pattern in the victims. But is there a pattern in the locations? Are the disappearances clustered geographically?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Then, they're all along the northeastern border, within about 50 miles of each other. And what's in that area? Resources, strategic positions, anything valuable?" "Old forest, mostly. Some of the oldest growth in our territory. It's protected land. No hunting, no settlement. Just wilderness that's been there since..." He stopped, his eyes widening. "Since before the packs formally organized. It's sacred ground." "Then maybe someone wants it," I suggested. "Not the people. The land itself." Dorian stood abruptly, energy returning to his exhausted frame. "That would explain why there's no pattern in victims. They're not the target. They're just in the way." He grabbed a map from a nearby shelf, spreading it across my organized documents with an apologetic glance. "If I'm right about this, if someone's trying to claim that territory, then they're declaring war," I finished quietly. Strategically. removing obstacles without drawing enough attention to trigger a full response. His finger traced the border on the map. It's brilliant, actually. By the time we realize what's happening, they'll already control the territory. What will you do? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something fierce and protective burning behind those amber eyes. Stop them. Protect my people, whatever it takes. The conviction in his voice sent shivers down my spine. Not fear exactly, but recognition of the kind of strength I'd never possessed, the ability to stand between danger and the people you cared about. Even when you were exhausted and overwhelmed and probably terrified. You're not alone in this, I said quietly. You have your council, your sister, your people. Let them help carry the weight. I know. He rolled up the map carefully, his movements controlled again, but it's hard to trust that they won't be disappointed when they see how uncertain I actually am. I think they'd be more disappointed if you pretended to have all the answers when you don't. I met his gaze. Honesty is harder than confidence, but it's also worth more. For a moment, we just stood there, too close in the dimming light of the library, two people who understood what it meant to feel inadequate while everyone expected strength. Then Dorian smiled, small and tired, but genuine. Thank you, he said, for listening, for helping me see what I was missing, he paused, for being here. Where else would I be? I tried to keep my tone light. I have border disputes to catalog. Right. He moved toward the door but stopped at the threshold, just as he had that morning. Sarah? I'm glad you boarded the wrong carriage. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me alone in a library full of other people's histories, wondering how I'd managed to accidentally stumble into a story that was starting to feel dangerously like it might be my own. 3 days passed in a rhythm I hadn't expected to find comforting. Mornings began in the library, where I continued cataloging centuries of accumulated knowledge. The work was meticulous and demanding, requiring the kind of focus that left no room for anxiety or self-doubt. I created systems, cross-referenced documents, built indexes that would allow Dorian's counsel to find precedents and patterns buried in the chaos. It was the first time in my life that my peculiar skills felt genuinely valuable, rather than simply tolerated. Afternoons varied. Sometimes Calla would sweep in and drag me away for walks through the gardens, where she'd talk about pack politics with the casual ruthlessness of someone who understood power intimately. Other times, Connor would appear with questions about historical border agreements, treating me with the same professional courtesy he showed Dorian's other advisors. And occasionally, Dorian himself would arrive, ostensibly to check my progress, but really, I suspected, because the library offered him refuge from the constant demands of leadership. Those were my favorite moments. We'd fallen into an easy conversation, Dorian and I. He'd ask about what I'd discovered in the documents, and I'd explain patterns I'd noticed, how certain families cycled through alliance and betrayal across generations, how territorial disputes often masked deeper conflicts over resources or pride. Then he'd share his own observations about current politics, drawing connections between past and present that helped him navigate the increasingly complicated situation at the northeastern border. But we also talked about other things. Books we'd read, places we wanted to see, the strange isolation of being surrounded by people who expected you to be something you weren't sure how to become. Those conversations felt dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. Too honest, too intimate, building toward something I couldn't afford to want, because I was leaving in 4 days. Back to the plan, back to my aunt's house in the settlements, back to building a life that didn't include libraries or amber eyes or the peculiar warmth of being truly seen. It was better not to think about it. On the 4th morning, I arrived at the library to find Dorian already there, pacing in front of the windows with the restless energy of someone who'd been up all night. He looked terrible. Shadows under his eyes, tension radiating from every line of his body, his usual control fraying at the edges. What happened? I asked, setting down the tea I'd brought from breakfast. Another disappearance. His voice was rough. Last night, Connor's daughter. The words hit like a physical blow. I'd met Connor's daughter briefly, Ivy, 17 years old, bright and curious, and full of that fearless energy young people possessed before the world taught them caution. She'd been helping in the archives 2 days ago, asking questions about preservation techniques, and making Dorian laugh with her irreverent commentary on ancient treaty language. Oh gods, I breathed. Connor is organizing a search party. Dorian stopped pacing, gripping the back of a chair with white-knuckled hands. But we both know they won't find anything, not unless we figure out what's actually happening. I moved to the table where I'd been organizing border documents, my mind already racing. You said the disappearances are clustered geographically. Have you mapped the exact locations? Connor has, but there's no pattern we can show me. He pulled out the map, now marked with red points indicating each disappearance. I studied it, looking for connections my human eyes might catch that predator instincts missed. The points did seem random at first glance, scattered across 50 miles of northeastern territory without obvious logic. But then I noticed something. Do you have a topographical map? I asked. Something that shows elevation, water sources, natural landmarks? Dorian moved to the shelves, returning with a larger, more detailed map. I laid it beside the first, comparing the marked locations to the terrain features, and there it was. So obvious I couldn't believe no one had seen it before. They're not random, I said quietly. Look. Every single disappearance happened near a water source. Rivers, streams, springs, and they form a perimeter. Dorian leaned over my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. A perimeter around what? I traced the invisible boundary with my finger. This area here. About 20 square miles of old-growth forest. No settlements, no development. You said it was sacred ground? The heart of the old territory, where the first packs gathered centuries ago. His breath caught. There are ruins there. Ancient stone structures no one's been able to date. We've always protected it, but we've never fully explored it. The elders say it's forbidden, that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. What if someone's crossing them anyway? I looked up at him, finding his face inches from mine. What if they're taking people to use as leverage or bargaining chips or fuel? Dorian finished, his expression going cold. Some old magic requires sacrifice. Blood and life given willingly or taken by force. The implications settled over us like frost. Someone was using pack members to power magic in the heart of sacred territory, and they'd been doing it quietly enough that by the time anyone noticed the pattern, they'd already accumulated enough power to be dangerous. You need to tell the council, I said. I need proof. He straightened, moving back to his pacing. If I accuse someone of using forbidden magic without evidence, it'll cause panic. Division. Exactly what we can't afford right now. Then we find proof. The words escaped before I could think better of them. Let me help. Dorian stopped, turning to look at me with an expression I couldn't read. Sarah, this is dangerous. These aren't border disputes or filing systems. This is your people being taken, I interrupted. Including someone I met, someone kind and bright who deserves to be found. I stood, facing him across the table. I know I'm human. I know I'm not strong or fast or equipped for whatever this requires. But I'm good at patterns, good at research, good at finding connections other people miss. Let me help. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then, you're also stubborn. Yes. And you don't back down even when you probably should. Also, yes. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. The old archives, the ones dealing with sacred sites and ancient practices, are in the vault beneath this library. No one's accessed them in decades. The documents are fragile, written in old dialects that most modern scholars can't translate. He paused. But you're not most scholars. Show me. The vault turned out to be exactly what it sounded like, a reinforced chamber deep beneath the library, accessed through a door hidden behind a shelf of religious texts. Dorian produced a key from somewhere, and we descended into cool darkness that smelled of stone and age and secrets. He lit lamps as we entered, revealing a smaller space lined with glass cases protecting manuscripts so old they looked like they might disintegrate if breathed on too hard. The air itself felt heavy here, charged with the weight of knowledge deliberately hidden, rather than simply forgotten. My father sealed most of these, Dorian said quietly, moving between the cases. He believed some knowledge was too dangerous to be accessible, but he also believed it should be preserved, just in case. He stopped before one case in particular. These are the records of the first gathering, when the packs came together and claimed this territory as sacred ground. I pressed close to the glass, studying the manuscript within. The writing was elaborate, each letter formed with careful precision in ink that had faded to brown. The language was archaic, but not incomprehensible, similar enough to modern dialects that I could parse meaning with effort. "Can you open it?" I asked. Dorian hesitated. "Once we do, there's no going back. Whatever we learn, we'll have to act on. Connor's daughter is missing. We're already past the point of going back." He produced another key, smaller and more ornate than the first. The case opened with a whisper of displaced air, and together we carefully lifted the manuscript to a reading table Dorian cleared of dust. I bent over the pages, my eyes adjusting to the archaic script. Dorian stood beside me, close enough to read over my shoulder, his presence both distracting and somehow necessary. "It's a covenant," I murmured, tracing the words with my finger held carefully above the surface, an agreement between the first packs and something else, something that lived in the forest before they arrived. What kind of something? I read further, my heart beating faster as the implications became clear. An entity. Old magic given form and consciousness. It agreed to share the territory if the packs honored certain conditions. Never harm the old growth forest, never build within the sacred perimeter. And never... I stopped, my blood running cold. "Never what?" Dorian's voice was tight. "Never spill blood on the ancient stones." I looked up at him. "The ruins you mentioned, they're not just historical landmarks. They're a prison, or maybe a seal. Something designed to keep the entity contained as long as the covenant remains unbroken." Dorian's hand found the edge of the table, gripping it hard. "And if someone breaks the covenant?" I returned to the manuscript, reading the consequences written in matter-of-fact script by someone who'd witnessed things I couldn't imagine. The entity wakes, fully. And it takes back what it considers stolen. The territory, the lives, everything the packs have built on land it considers its own. How do you break a covenant like that? "Blood on the ancient stones," I read. Specifically, the blood of pack members descended from the original families who made the agreement. 8 bloodlines. 8 sacrifices to undo 8 promises. We looked at each other, the horrifying logic clicking into place. 8 people missing. 8 bloodlines represented in the oldest pack families. Someone was systematically breaking the covenant, one sacrifice at a time. "Ivy," Dorian said hoarsely. "Connor's family is one of the original 8. "Then she's still alive," I said quickly. "Whoever's doing this needs the ritual to be completed properly. They have to perform all 8 sacrifices before they can fully break the seal." I scanned the document, looking for any detail that might help. "There's a time frame. The sacrifices have to happen during a specific lunar cycle, new moon to full moon." Dorian pulled out a small calendar he kept in his pocket, the kind leaders carried to track meetings and obligations. His face went pale. "The full moon is in 3 days. 3 days to find 8 captives, stop whoever was orchestrating this, and prevent an ancient entity from waking and destroying everything Dorian's people had built. 3 days before the consequences of broken promises came due." "We need to search the ruins," I said. "Tonight. Before they can complete the ritual." "We?" Dorian shook his head. "Sarah, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." I met his gaze steadily. I found the pattern. I translated the covenant. "I'm the only one who can read these documents and understand what we're dealing with. You need me. I need you safe," he said quietly, and the raw honesty in his voice made my breath catch. "If something happened to you because I brought you into this, then it would be my choice." I reached out without thinking, my hand finding his where it still gripped the table. His skin was warm beneath my fingers, steady despite the tremor I could see in his shoulders. "You carry too much alone, Dorian. Let someone help. Let me help." For a moment, neither of us moved. The vault felt suddenly smaller, the air charged with something that had nothing to do with ancient magic. Dorian's eyes searched my face, looking for doubt or fear, but I kept my expression open, honest, letting him see that I meant it. "You're impossibly brave for someone who claims to be good at being invisible," he finally said, his voice rough. Maybe I'm tired of being invisible. The admission escaped before I could stop it. Maybe I want to matter, just once, for something more than my ability to catalog other people's achievements. You matter, Dorian said, and the conviction in his words wrapped around me like warmth. You've mattered since the moment you looked me in the eye and told me the difference between running away and leaving. Since you listened when I admitted I was lonely and didn't offer false comfort or easy solutions. Since you saw these documents and made connections no one else could. His hand turned beneath mine, fingers interlacing. You matter, Sarah. To this investigation, yes. But also to... He stopped, seeming to catch himself. To what? I whispered. To me. The words fell between us like a confession. You matter to me in ways I don't entirely understand and probably shouldn't be feeling about someone who's leaving in 4 days. The reminder of my impending departure hit harder than it should have. 4 days. Less than that now. I should have been counting down, eager to escape before this temporary refuge became another place where I didn't quite fit. Instead, I was standing in a vault beneath a library, holding hands with an Alpha King, wanting nothing more than to stay. We should gather the others, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Connor, Calla, whoever you trust. If we're going to search the ruins tonight... No. Dorian's grip tightened on my hand. Not a large group. Whoever's orchestrating this is likely someone with access to pack information. Someone who knows our movements, our plans. The more people we involve, the greater the risk they'll hear about it and move the captives. Then who? You and me. Connor, because his daughter is missing, and he deserves to be part of finding her. Maybe 2 others I trust absolutely. He paused. It's risky. Possibly stupid, but it's the only way to maintain surprise. I thought about arguing, about pointing out all the ways this could go wrong, but I'd already committed to helping. Already decided that for once in my life, I was going to choose courage over caution. When do we leave? I asked instead. Dorian's smile was small and fierce. Midnight, when most of the household is sleeping. Wear dark clothes, practical shoes. And Sarah? He squeezed my hand gently before releasing it. Thank you. For all of this. We spent the rest of the day preparing in secret. Dorian briefed Connor privately, watching the older man's expression shift from grief to cold determination. Calla appeared periodically with information she claimed to have gathered through totally legitimate means, which definitely meant she'd been eavesdropping and interrogating servants. 2 others joined our conspiracy. Twins named Rowan and Ash, whose loyalty Dorian trusted implicitly and whose tracking skills were apparently legendary. I returned to the vault, copying relevant passages from the ancient manuscript in case we needed to reference the Covenant's exact wording. My hand cramped from the careful work, but I didn't stop. Somewhere in these pages might be the key to saving Ivy and the others, to preventing catastrophe, to proving I could be more than just someone who made mistakes and ran away from consequences. As midnight approached, I changed into the darkest clothes I could find, borrowed trousers and a tunic that fit well enough, sturdy boots that would handle rough terrain. I braided my hair tightly, trying to make myself as inconspicuous as possible, though my pale coloring would still mark me as human, even in darkness. Dorian was waiting in the library when I arrived, dressed similarly in dark clothes that somehow made him look more dangerous than his usual formal attire. Connor stood beside him, his expression carved from stone, violence simmering beneath the surface of his control. The twins flanked them, identical except that Rowan's eyes were green, while Ash's were brown, both watching me with the alert curiosity of predators encountering something new. Everyone understands the plan? Dorian asked quietly. Nods all around. We'd approach the ruins from different directions, converging on the central structure where the Covenant had been sealed. If we found the captives, we'd free them. If we found whoever was orchestrating the sacrifices, we'd stop them. And if we encountered the entity itself, well, we'd improvised. Stay close to me, Dorian murmured as we prepared to leave. The forest at night can be disorienting for humans. I'll manage, I said, with more confidence than I felt. His hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing once. I know you will. Then we were moving, slipping out of the estate through a servant's entrance, disappearing into the forest where ancient promises waited to be kept or broken, and where 8 lives hung in the balance between darkness and dawn. The forest at night was a living thing. Trees older than memory towered overhead, their branches interlacing to block out the stars. Moonlight filtered through in scattered patches, painting the forest floor in silver and shadow. Every sound amplified in the darkness, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through ancient branches. And beneath it all, a pulse I couldn't quite hear, but somehow felt. Like the heartbeat of the earth itself, Dorian moved through the terrain, with the fluid grace of someone who belonged here, his hand occasionally reaching back to steady me over rough ground. Connor and the twins had split off in different directions, converging on the ruins from multiple angles. We'd agreed to minimal communication. Sound carried too well in the silence, and we couldn't risk alerting whoever might be waiting. "How much further?" I whispered. "Half a mile." Dorian's voice was barely audible. "The trees will thin near the ruins. When they do, we move carefully. Stay behind me." I wanted to argue that I wasn't helpless. But the truth was, I'd never been in a forest at night, never stalked through darkness toward potential violence. My skills lay in patterns and words, not navigation and stealth. So I nodded and focused on keeping my footsteps quiet, on breathing steadily despite the fear coiling in my chest. The trees began to thin exactly as Dorian predicted. Through the remaining growth, I could see stone structures rising from the forest floor, walls that had once stood tall, but now crumbled into ruin, pillars still reaching toward the sky like fingers of some buried giant. In the center, barely visible, stood something more intact, a circular platform surrounded by standing stones, marked with symbols I recognized from the manuscript. The seal. Where the covenant had been forged and where it could be broken, Dorian pulled me down behind a fallen log, his body tense beside mine. "There," he breathed, pointing. At first I saw nothing, then movement caught my eye, figures near the central platform, maybe 8 or 9 of them, moving with purpose. And bound to the standing stones, barely conscious, were the missing pack members. I could just make out Ivy among them, her head hanging forward, blood staining her shirt. 7 stones occupied, 7 sacrifices already completed. 1 remained empty. "We're almost too late," I whispered. But not yet. Dorian's hand found mine, squeezing hard. "Connor will move on my signal. The twins will cut off escape routes. We need to free the captives and stop whoever's leading this before they can complete the 8th sacrifice." "Who is leading it?" As if in answer, a new figure emerged from behind the platform. Even in the darkness, I recognized the confident stride, the elegant bearing. My heart sank. "No," Dorian breathed, his entire body going rigid. "It can't be." But it was. Calla stepped into the moonlight, her smile visible even from our hiding spot. She wore robes instead of her usual elegant attire, covered in symbols that matched those on the standing stones. In her hand, she carried something that gleamed, a ceremonial knife, its blade catching the light. "My sister," Dorian's voice broke on the words. "My own sister." The betrayal in his tone cut deeper than any blade. I gripped his hand tighter, trying to offer comfort while my mind raced through everything I'd seen over the past 4 days. Calla's too convenient arrival on the carriage, her insistence that I stay, the information she'd gathered through legitimate means. She'd been watching, testing, ensuring I discovered exactly what she wanted me to discover. "She wanted us to find this," I said quietly. "The manuscript, the pattern, all of it. She made sure we'd come here tonight." "Why?" Dorian's voice was hollow. "Why would she do this?" I thought about our conversations, the things Calla had said about her brother, how he'd become too focused on duty, how he needed to be unsettled, to feel something again, how everyone suitable threw themselves at him while he barely noticed. "She thinks she's saving you," I realized. "Breaking the covenant, releasing the entity, it would force you to act, to fight, to be the warrior instead of the diplomat. She said you'd become dull, so she'd destroy everything our family built to make me interesting again." The words came out strangled. Before I could respond, Calla's voice rang out across the clearing. I know you're there, brother. You and your clever human and whoever else you brought. You might as well come out. The ritual's nearly complete, and there's nothing you can do to stop it now. Dorian stood slowly, his hand still gripping mine. Stay here, he said. No. I rose beside him. We do this together. His eyes met mine in the darkness, amber catching moonlight. For a moment I saw everything he was feeling. Betrayal, grief, determination. Then he nodded once, and we stepped into the clearing. Connor emerged from the opposite side, the twins flanking him. All of them stared at Calla with expressions ranging from shock to barely controlled rage. She smiled at them, like this was a social gathering instead of a ritual sacrifice. There you are, she said warmly. Perfect timing. I was worried you'd miss the finale. Calla. Dorian's voice was carefully controlled, but I could feel him trembling beside me. Stop this. Whatever you think you're accomplishing. I'm waking you up, she interrupted. You've been sleepwalking through life for 3 years, brother. Ever since Father died, and you accepted this crown you never wanted. You've buried yourself in duty and responsibility until you've forgotten what it means to actually live, to fight, to feel anything beyond obligation. So you decided to release an ancient entity that could destroy our entire territory? Connor's voice was dangerously quiet. My daughter is bleeding on those stones because you wanted to teach Dorian a lesson? Your daughter will be fine once this is over, Calla said dismissively. They all will. The entity doesn't want destruction. It wants acknowledgement, respect, a renegotiation of terms that our ancestors imposed without consent. She turned back to Dorian. Don't you see? This is an opportunity to forge a new covenant, to prove yourself as something more than Father's pale shadow, to actually matter. I matter to the people I protect, Dorian said quietly. That's enough. It's not enough for you. I see how hollow you are, brother. How lonely. Going through motions because it's expected, never allowing yourself to want anything beyond duty. Calla's expression softened. I'm trying to give you a chance to be whole again. By betraying everything he stands for? I found my voice, stepping forward despite Dorian's hand tightening on mine. By hurting innocent people, by forcing him to choose between stopping you and saving his people. Calla's gaze shifted to me, sharp and assessing. Yes. The human. I wondered if you'd actually understand what you found in those documents. Clever girl. She tilted her head. Tell me, Sarah. In the 4 days you've been here, have you seen my brother smile? Really smile? Not that careful mask he wears for councils and politics? Have you seen him interested in anything beyond obligation? I thought about late-night conversations in the library, the small, genuine smiles when I'd made connections he'd missed. The way his eyes had lit up when talking about poetry, and travel, and dreams he'd abandoned. The honesty of his loneliness, shared with someone who understood. Yes, I said quietly. I have. Something flickered across Calla's face. Surprise, maybe, or recalculation. Because of you? Because someone listened without wanting anything from him. Because someone saw him instead of his title. I met her gaze steadily. You think breaking the covenant will make him whole? It'll just prove that the people he loves most are willing to sacrifice everything for some twisted idea of what's best for him. That's not love, Calla. That's control. For the first time, Calla's confidence wavered. I'm trying to help him. You're trying to make him into what you think he should be, Dorian said, his voice rough with emotion. But that's not your choice to make. It never was. He took a step forward. I know I've changed since Father died. I know I've buried parts of myself under responsibility, but that doesn't give you the right to destroy everything to force me back into some version of myself you find more acceptable. The ritual is almost complete, Calla said, but her conviction was cracking. One more sacrifice, and the entity wakes. You can negotiate with it, forge a new covenant on your terms instead of Father's, prove yourself worthy. I don't need to prove myself to an ancient entity, Dorian said quietly. I need to protect my people. That's what makes me worthy. Not grand gestures or dramatic battles, but showing up every day to do the work that needs doing, even when it's hard and lonely and thankless. That's not enough. It is for me. He gestured to the bound captives. "Let them go, Calla, please, before this goes too far to undo." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Calla's hand tightened on the ceremonial knife, and I saw her making a decision, not to stop, but to complete what she'd started, to force her brother into the confrontation she believed would save him. She turned toward the 8th stone, toward the space where one final sacrifice would break the seal. And I realized with horrifying clarity who she intended to use. "Sarah," Dorian breathed, understanding at the same moment. Calla smiled sadly. "She's not Pack, not protected by the original covenant. But her blood spilled willingly on the stones, blood of someone who matters to you, that would complete the ritual beautifully. A human sacrifice for a human achievement. Poetic, really." Connor and the twins moved to intercept, but Calla was faster. She crossed the distance between us in a blur of supernatural speed, the knife rising. I barely had time to register the threat before Dorian was there, stepping between us, his hand catching Calla's wrist with enough force to make her gasp. "No," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "I won't let you hurt her. I won't let you complete this ritual. And if you truly loved me, you'd never have asked me to choose between stopping you and protecting someone I—" He stopped, his eyes finding mine over his sister's shoulder. "Someone who matters." The clearing went still. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. Calla stared at her brother, really seeing him for the first time. "You care about her." "Yes. More than duty. More than the covenant. I care about both," Dorian said quietly, "but I won't sacrifice one to save the other." "That's not strength, Calla. That's just fear dressed up as conviction." Something broke in Calla's expression. The knife fell from her fingers, clattering against stone. "I didn't mean— I thought I was helping. I thought if I could just make you feel something again, you'd remember who you used to be." "I'm not who I used to be," Dorian said, releasing her wrist gently. "I can't be. Father's death changed me. Becoming Alpha King changed me. But that doesn't mean I'm broken. It means I'm different." He paused. "You should have trusted me to figure out my own path instead of trying to force me onto yours." Calla looked at the bound captives, at the ritual she'd orchestrated, at the consequences of her good intentions twisted into betrayal. "What have I done?" "Something we can still fix," I said, moving to stand beside Dorian. "The covenant isn't fully broken. 7 sacrifices aren't enough to complete the ritual. We can still stop this." Connor was already moving toward his daughter, the twins working to free the other captives. Blood stained the stones beneath their feet, but the seal still held. Barely. "The entity," Calla said, her voice small. "I can feel it stirring, aware but not awake. If we don't complete the ritual, it might wake anyway, angry at being disturbed." I thought about the manuscript, the careful words describing the original covenant. Or we could speak to it, acknowledge what was done, apologize for the disturbance, and reaffirm the agreement. Show respect instead of fear. "That's insane," Rowan said, supporting one of the freed captives. "You can't just talk to an ancient entity like it's a reasonable being." "Why not?" I looked at Dorian. "The original covenant was a negotiation, not a conquest. The Pax asked to share the territory, and the entity agreed. Maybe it's not a monster. Maybe it's just old and powerful and tired of being treated like a threat instead of a neighbor." Dorian's eyes met mine, and I saw understanding dawn. "You want to apologize to the thing my sister was trying to wake. I want to acknowledge that someone disturbed it without permission, show respect for its territory, and ask if we can continue the original agreement." I paused. "What's the worst that could happen? It could kill us all," Ash said helpfully. "Or it could appreciate someone finally treating it with dignity instead of just sealing it away and hoping it stays quiet." I turned to the standing stones, to the symbols I'd spent hours translating. "I can read the old language. I can speak the words of the covenant. If someone helps me with pronunciation, I will," Calla said quietly. "It's my mess. I should help clean it up." So there, in a clearing lit by moonlight, and surrounded by ancient stones stained with blood, I spoke to something older than memory. Calla corrected my pronunciation, her voice shaking but steady. Dorian stood beside me, his hand in mine. lending me courage I didn't know I possessed. I acknowledged the disturbance, apologized for the deception and the blood spilled without consent. Explained that the current pack leadership had known nothing of this attempt to break the covenant, and that they wished to continue honoring the original agreement. And then, because it felt right, I added something not in the script. "We see you," I said in the old language, the words flowing more easily now, not as a threat to be contained, but as the original guardian of this land. "We ask to continue sharing this territory, respecting the boundaries and honoring the ancient promises. Not because we fear you, but because we value what was built together." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the air itself seemed to shift, growing heavier with presence. The symbols on the standing stones began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, filling the clearing with soft light, and I felt something watching, vast and patient and curious. A voice that wasn't a voice whispered through my mind, through all our minds, seen, heard, acknowledged. The light faded slowly, the presence withdrawing like a tide receding from shore. The blood on the stones dried and flaked away, leaving clean rock behind, and the captives, who'd been unconscious and bleeding, stirred with confused awareness, their wounds healing as the entity released its claim on their sacrifice. Ivy opened her eyes, looking directly at her father. "Dad?" Connor pulled her into his arms, his shoulders shaking with relief. The twins helped the others stand, checking them for injuries that were no longer there. And Calla sank to her knees, staring at the stones with an expression of wonder and horror. "It listened," she whispered. "To a human girl who just asked politely. Sometimes that's all it takes," I said, my legs suddenly unreliable with exhaustion and relief. Respect instead of force, conversation instead of conquest. Dorian caught me as I swayed, his arm around my waist, solid and warm. "You were incredible," he said quietly, just for me. "Brave and brilliant and completely terrifying." "I was terrified the whole time," I admitted. "I know. That's what made it brave." We stood like that for a moment, his arms around me, both of us shaking with aftershock. Around us, the others gathered the freed captives, preparing for the journey back to the estate. Calla remained kneeling by the stones, Connor standing over her with an expression that promised future conversations about consequences and trust. But that was for later. For now, we'd stopped a catastrophe, saved 8 lives, and proven that sometimes the answer to impossible situations was simply treating everyone involved, even ancient entities, with basic dignity. The walk back through the forest felt longer than the approach. Dawn was breaking by the time we emerged from the trees, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The estate rose before us, solid and reassuring, a reminder of what we'd protected. The next few days passed in a blur of explanations and consequences. Calla faced the council, admitting her role and accepting exile to the Eastern Territories for a year. Enough time, Dorian hoped, for her to understand the weight of what she'd done. The freed captives recovered fully, their families grateful beyond words, and the covenant was formally reaffirmed, with new rituals added to ensure regular acknowledgement of the entity that shared their land. Through it all, I remained. Not as a guest anymore, but as something more permanent. Dorian offered me a formal position as royal archivist, with a salary that made my eyes water and quarters in the estate that felt impossibly luxurious. But more than that, he offered me a place. A purpose. A reason to stay that had nothing to do with running from my past, and everything to do with building a future. 3 months later, I stood in the library surrounded by perfectly organized documents. Systems I'd built that actually worked, evidence that my peculiar skills had value beyond simple survival. Connor had become a friend, teaching me about pack culture with patient humor. The twins treated me like an honorary pack member, including me in their irreverent commentary on council politics. And Dorian had become everything I hadn't known I needed. He appeared in the library doorway as I was finishing for the day, his hair messy from running his hands through it during a particularly frustrating council meeting, but he was smiling. Genuinely, openly, in a way he apparently hadn't done for years before I'd accidentally stumbled into his life. "How was the meeting?" I asked, setting aside the document I'd been cataloging. "Tedious, political, necessary." He crossed the room, pulling me into his arms with the easy familiarity we'd developed. But I kept thinking about this, about coming back here to you. Just to me? Not to your perfectly organized archives? The archives are a bonus, he said, pressing a kiss to my forehead. You're the reason. I leaned into him, breathing in the scent of pine and something uniquely his. I still can't believe I boarded the wrong carriage. Best mistake you ever made? Best decision, I corrected. I'm choosing to believe I knew exactly what I was doing. Dorian laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Rewriting history already? Someone has to archive these events properly. Might as well be me. We stood like that as the sun set, casting golden light through the library windows. In 4 days, there would be a ceremony, formal recognition of my position, official welcome into the Pack community, but more importantly, there would be Dorian's hand in mine as we faced the council together. 2 people who'd found each other through accident and choice, and the stubborn refusal to be anything less than honest. I'd come here running from disappointment, convinced I didn't fit anywhere. Instead, I'd found a place where my differences were valued, where my strengths mattered, where being seen was a gift rather than a burden. And I'd found someone who understood loneliness intimately enough to recognize its opposite when it appeared, who valued courage over confidence, honesty over perfection, conversation over conquest. I love you, Dorian said quietly, the words still new enough to make my heart race. My clever, brave, impossible human who talked to an ancient entity like it was a neighbor and somehow made it work. I love you too, I whispered back. My poet king who forgot how to dream until someone reminded him it was allowed. Outside, the forest whispered in the wind, ancient and patient. Somewhere in its heart, an entity slept peacefully, acknowledged and respected. And here, in a library full of stories about other people's lives, we wrote our own ending, one that felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. Connor's daughter got married the following spring. The twins eventually stopped making jokes about the human who'd saved everyone by being polite. Calla returned from exile with genuine remorse and a tentative friendship with me that grew stronger over time. And Dorian and I continued the work of building a life together, balancing duty with dreams, responsibility with joy, the weight of a crown, with the lightness of being truly known. Years later, when people asked how we met, I'd smile and say I boarded the wrong carriage. But in my heart, I knew the truth. I'd finally boarded the right one at exactly the moment I needed to, carrying me toward a future I'd never imagined but couldn't picture living without. Some mistakes, after all, are really just destiny wearing a clever disguise.